detailed labour costings in the blacked out parts of the business plan, because they're not in the non-blacked out parts of the business plan? Are they in the blacked out parts?
I'm sure that Mr Quigley has the information that you're seeking. Whether it was written as specifically as you've asked or not, I'm not sure. But again, it would be preposterous and damaging to both the NBN Co and taxpayers to reveal this information. Preposterous.
All right then. Minister, how were you able to say to the Senate on the 15th of November, and I quote, "Overall, I believe the answer will be no. There's no blowout in wages costs because we have an agreed set of EBA principles." You went on to say they've now been signed and agreed by the ACTU, coordinating right through with the CEPU and a range of other unions that have been involved in these discussions. And then you went on and on and on.
You're now asking about two different things.
Well, about what were you
One
talking?
is the
because
workforce.
If you were speaking about,
one is the workforce.
If you were speaking about NBN Co's workforce,
one of the workforce of NBN Co.
Senator Fisher, order. Order.
Not the big
order, Senator Fisher. Senator Fisher, order. And Senator Fisher, if you want to go down that track, then it will be a problem for this committee, let me tell you. You're the Deputy Chair and you should behave.
Thank you, Chair.
Senator Conroy.
Two entirely different things that you're referring to.
I'm not asking about NBN Co's workforce. I'm asking about workers employed by everybody other than NBN Co.
But they are not currently employed by NBN Co.
The implementation study factored wage increases for those workers of some 2.5% a year.
Could I clarify that? I didn't want to interrupt earlier, Senator, but you're mischaracterising what the implementation study actually said.
Please recharacterise me.
Talking about the construction cost index growth, some factor of which we labour, but other factors also be involved in there, and was actually speculating that that was a factor that was in the implementation study that was plausible to drive down by competitive tendering by NBN, and was placed in the implementation study to show that there was a reasonable margin for error, if you like, in estimates, because those sort of matters hadn't been taken to be delivering particular levels of savings. It wasn't simply labour cost savings. So it's important, if we do go through this debate, we don't just characterise it as the McKinsey study said labour costs will increase by 2.5%. It's the construction cost index per se.
And to clarify further for you, Senator Fisher, NBN Co has entered into 4 enterprise agreements covering only NBN Co employees and has worked with the ACTU and relevant unions in finalising these agreements. The 4 agreements have all been approved by Fair Work Australia and are the NBN Co and Electrical Plumbing Union, CEPU, Technical Employees Agreement 2010-2014.
Thank you, Minister.
No, I haven't finished.
I've got your written response to me saying exactly that.
Senator Fisher, allow the Minister to respond.
Which covers NBN Co employees that will be working in connection with the Network Operations Centre, the NBN Co and the Association of Professional Engineers, Scientists and Managers Australia, a PESMA, Professional Employees Agreement 2010-2014, which covers some classes of professional engineers and some IT architecture employees who will work for NBN Co. The NBN Co Clerical and Administrative Employees Agreement 2010 and 2014, which covers NBN Co Clerical and Administrative Employees, and the NBN Co Contract Centre Employees Agreement 2010 to 2014, which covers NBN Co employees who may work in an NBN Co call centre.
Thank you, Minister, for telling me that which you told me a couple of weeks ago in response to a question I asked you in the Senate. And I note that all of that covers NBN Co's workers, which is all well and good. But, Minister, back to your reference to the agreed set of EBA principles.
Yes, I've just described what the EBAs were.
So there is no agreed set of EBA principles
with people who don't work for NBN Co, surprisingly no.
All right. So in respect of the vast majority of workers to build the NBN, which are not those currently employed by NBN Co, but the host of workers that will be employed in digging and rolling out and engineering and re-engineering and not employed by NBN Co. In respect of those workers, they were not included in your reassurance to the Senate that there will be no blowout in wages. And in respect of those workers, can you reassure this committee that there will be no blowout in wages in respect of those workers, which will impact on the NBN's bottom line?
All Australian businesses are faced with the same cost pressures at the moment due to a whole range of factors. We have low unemployment. We've just had a number of tragedies in Queensland and across Australia, and they are creating pressures for every company in Australia who's engaged in any sort of construction work. The NBN Co is very conscious of these and is working through its processes to ensure that they are in a position to ensure that they meet their targets.
Thank you. Mr Peter Tai, Secretary of the CEPU, told, and I hope I'm not verballing him, but gave evidence to a Senate committee last week inquiring into industry skills councils about a forum that he attended where he presented what was needed in terms of training for workers required to build, for workers required in various aspects of the rollout of the NBN. Are you familiar with that, Mr Quigley?
I'm familiar with the work that we've done in NBN Co to look at skills and what skills we need and what training plans we need.
All right. Is the department familiar with Mr Tai's views as to, in his capacity as a member of...
We read them on the front page of the Australian about 2 months ago.
Well, that
and
might
we've
be
read them on in the Fin Review when they repeated a story that was about 2 months old in the Australian.
Yeah, about 5% a year for electricians and 10%
as I said, the Australian ran that story about 2 months ago.
Well, that's about wages. My question here is about the training required for the people to build the NBN. Are you familiar with the relevant industry skills council's view as to the training module that needs to be approved so these workers can be trained?
Not to that level of detail.
All right. Well, Mr Tai expressed concerns that in his view that program needed to be approved so it could get tracking quick smart. Was not only is there the projection that he has made prior to the various natural disasters that we've experienced about shortage of the technical workers required to build the NBN, but that has been will be exacerbated potentially, will it not, by the natural disasters we've had. Minister.
Well, as I said, that it's clear that a whole range of recent events have put pressure on every company in Australia. But one of the reasons the government's putting $100 million on the table to retrain Telstra employees is to try and ease some of these pressures. And the training of employees is something that NBN Co takes very seriously. So we're all aware of those pressures. Mr Quigley's aware of those pressures. And I'm not sure that much more can be said.
Well, Mr Quigley did on the 4th of Feb, Minister, in Cobham's Day, so presumably you'd read that more than you read the Australian. But, Mr Quigley, you were quoted as referring to labour shortages and saying they're a big issue. It's an external factor that's hard to control. We know that particularly in Queensland. You're quoted as going on to say we've done a detailed analysis of the skills we need in the company in order to build the network. There's a straight issue of will there be enough people to do this type of work in the construction industry. What I can tell you, you're reported as saying, is that the view of the company won't be such that we will just keep building regardless of the cost. If we find that costs are going up regardless of labour, we will go back to the shareholder and talk about that very carefully. Is that a correct quote of what you said?
Yes.
Okay. So clearly you're envisaging the prospect that the costs could go up in building the NBN due to labour?
I'm reflecting, I think, exactly what the Minister has just said, which is, given the number of disasters that have occurred across the company, given where employment levels are, clearly the number of people to do an undertaking such as this is going to be a factor we have to look at very carefully. But what I can assure you here is that we won't be building at any cost. If we find that costs are above what we have in our corporate plan, we will obviously go back to the shareholder, the government, and say, this is what the position is. How would you like us to proceed?
And so the options there will be what? Delay the work or increase the taxpayer spend?
I wouldn't say what the options are until we know what the situation is. I was answering a hypothetical question. What is the impact of all of these natural disasters? I would be being disingenuous if I said there is no impact.
Have you had any instances already, perhaps due to natural disasters, for example in Townsville, have you had any instances already at existing sites where work has had to be delayed or suspended or put on hold due to labour shortages?
No.
All right.
Just on that issue, on that question of the availability of skills, NBN is NBN facing anything different than any other company in the construction and building industry?
No. Just in terms, I think in terms of magnitude, we know we've got to execute the plan over this period. We've got to get to something like 5,900 homes passed a day when we're in full volume rollout. That's a magnitude question. Our analysis of the skills base is the training that's needed in those key areas can be organised. That's not such a big issue. The question really is one off scale. If there's obviously a lot of people sucked into the construction industry over the next few years in repairing the damage that occurred due to the natural disasters, we don't yet know what impact that will have on availability of people. It's not so much skills we're worried about, it's people.
What about the economic forecast that there'll be a shortfall of about 36,000 resource sector jobs over the next 5 years in the resource states, WA and Queensland? Will that impact your ability to recruit or the ability of those involved in building the NBN to recruit?
Senator. We're in the middle of an RFP process, which is about construction resources. I think we have to wait and see what the outcome of that is for the large construction companies in Australia.
Returning to Mr Tai, I think the name of the industry training body that he sits on, but I could be corrected, I think is the Construction and Information Technology Training Industry Council, and that body has said that there are approximately 63,000 cablers who are licensed and registered with ACMA to work inside premises, almost all of whom that body estimates would already be actively involved in that sort of work in Australia at present. And so they're estimating that an additional 30,000 cablers will be needed to satisfy the needs of the NBN rollout. Do you agree with that estimate? And if so, what will you be doing to find those workers?
You're talking about internal. Did you say
inside premises?
Inside premises.
That's apparently their view.
That doesn't align with the experience we've had so far and our expectations.
So you've been able to recruit those sorts of workers?
No, it's not a question of whether being able to recruit it. It's a question of how much internal wiring is necessary in order to utilise the services that NBN Co will be providing.
All right. So you disagree?
Yes, in most cases there is no internal wiring needed. Any additional internal wiring needed.
Okay. Thank you. Then, Chair, before I give others a go, just one more question to mop up an earlier issue. For the purposes of tonight, the Joint Parliamentary Committee, the member for Greenaway, I'm quoting from Hansard on the 9th of February, said, we had the member for Wentworth talk about the lack of oversight of the NBN rollout. He has a short memory, she says. He forgets that late last year, so she's saying this on the 9th of February this year, he forgets that late last year one of the last things we did was establish a joint committee on the NBN, which will report on a 6-monthly basis. Its membership will mirror that of the Joint Committee of Public Accounts and Audits. So to suggest there's no oversight of the NBN rollout process is a complete furphy. So does the member for Greenaway know something that the rest of us didn't, or did she unintentionally, I'm sure, mislead the House by saying that late last year the government, one of the last things we, i.e. the government, did was establish a joint committee on the NBN?
I'm sure she's referring to the Prime Minister's letter.
Statement of intent.
And as you're
at best.
And as you're aware from the discussions now, there are further discussions that have taken place since then, and I think they only came up quite recently. Senator Ludwin, you might want to help me out here.
Well, maybe, Minister. You see, part of the difficulty is these discussions were foreshadowed in the very healthily dying days of the Senate sitting last year, yet they have not come to any sort of fruition in terms of the establishment of a committee. So how does that help deliver on the Prime Minister's promise?
Well, as I said, we're in the process of finalising the negotiations, and hopefully early next week we'll have some further information for you.
Look forward to it.
Thanks, Senator Fisher. Senator McDonald.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I just have two very quick questions before I go to another Estems committee. You mentioned in your opening statement about the number of ISPs in Tasmania. Mm-hmm. You've told us at various hearings up to now that NBN was providing its services effectively for free up till the 1st of July.
Yes.
And that's happened?
Yes, they're still being provided free.
Okay. And 1st of July you're going to start charging?
We'll make an assessment of that. It's something we discuss with the ACCC whenever we make any move on pricing. So it depends on the state of our billing systems whether it in fact is worth doing at that point.
Okay. So correct me if I'm wrong, please. It's very important. For the investment NBN has made in Tasmania to date, you are effectively giving it away to the ISPs without charge. Is that correct?
No, I think the two issues are completely different. We've got a trial service going on which was put in place in order for us to get construction and rollout learnings from this. So the whole idea wasn't to make money out of these 3 sites in Tasmania. It's for a different purpose.
I'm sorry, Mr Quigley, I didn't ask you what the idea was. I simply asked, is it a matter of fact that the network you have in Tasmania now, which has cost, what, $300 million in round figures?
No, you're order of magnitude out, Senator.
Sorry?
You're an order of magnitude.
Well, could you tell me what it is,
Yes,
please?
it's approximately 30.
$30 million in Tasmania.
Which actually we told Senate estimates nearly a year ago.
That investment, you are not getting any return until at least the 1st of July.
There was never a plan to get a return. No. Yes, of course. Well, the answer is yes.
I'm asking.
Yes, the answer
thank
is.
you. I'm after the facts, not your intentions. Okay. That is the facts. That's been given away.
The fact was we weren't seeking to make a return. That's a fact.
And then, as of the 1st of July, from your previous answer, you're still thinking about whether you'll charge them or not.
I can't tell you at this point in time. We're in February. As we get closer, we'll make an assessment of that.
Are you able to? People in Tasmania are signing up to the internet service providers on the basis of their costs, which currently include nothing for your network. How will those people go when you actually start charging them something? And can you indicate to me, if not what you're going to charge them, how you're going to go about working out what you are going to charge them? Is it just going to be a commercial negotiation?
No, not at all. We've published in our corporate plan, all of the details of our pricing. The retail service providers who are providing services in Tasmania know all of those pricing. They factored their retail prices on that basis. It's up to them to decide how they're going to handle that.
Could you identify for me, perhaps I'll notice if needs be, the part of your corporate plan which indicates how you're going to charge?
Yeah, there's a whole... Certainly.
Well, you can tell me now, can you?
I can, if you'd like to... Wait just
and
a moment.
While you're doing that, either you or someone else... the only other question I have relates to the Townsville take-up. I have a lot of other questions, but...
Sections 8, starting on page 91. Page 91, that's on product definition and pricing.
And it goes through to?
Page 109 is the next section that starts on revenue forecast.
So you've got 18 pages of how you're going to charge.
Yes.
You can't reduce that to one line, can you, for me?
You could read...
Yeah, it's on page 101. We start with... now, there's different, as you know, in telcos, we've kept the pricing as simple as we possibly can because telco pricing tends to get a bit complex. We've got two components. The AVC, which is by far the biggest majority of it, that's the access virtual circuit. The PIR charges starting at 12 megabits downstream and 1 megabits upstream is $24 wholesale. 25 down, 5 megabits per second up is $27. 25 down, 10 up is $30. 50 megabits per second down, 20 up is $34. 100 megabits down, 40 megabits up is $38. 250 megabits down and 100 megabits per second up is $70.
I'll read the rest.
There's only two to go, Senator. 500 megabits down and 200 up is $100, and a gigabit per second down and 400 megabits per second up is $150.
Is that per connection?
Yes.
So would it be, for a layman, would it be appropriate for me then to add that price to whatever price the internet service provider is current? If I were a Tasmanian hooked up at the moment, so whatever they're charging me now, if I could add those prices to it, that'll give me an indication of about what
that's a wholesale price.
No. The answer is no to what you just said.
Well, I'm sorry. Mr. Quigley just said yes, Minister.
No, I think
Mr. Quigley just said yes.
What you were attempting to do, he was operating on a business principle, you were operating on a political one. You've just tried to add the existing retail price and then the wholesale price together to suggest that that's what will happen. That is not necessarily what will happen.
Well, can I ask Mr. Quigley again?
Yes.
Can I ask Mr. Quigley again, which is a look at Hansard will indicate this is what I asked you before, and to which you said yes. But I'm saying if I were a consumer in Tasmania currently signed up with an internet service provider, would I then, to know what I'm going to pay whenever you start charging, sometime after the 1st of July, would I add what I'm currently paying to what the figures you've just read out, approximately?
I'm sorry, Senator, I misunderstood your question. I thought you were asking me, does the retail provider add their retail margin to that wholesale price? That's what I answered yes to.
Well, they do.
If you're asking, are they going to add today what they're charging, I would expect what they're charging today is their retail price.
Yes.
And when we start charging, I would doubt that is going to change.
So is the $24 per month or per year?
Per month.
So you're saying whatever the internet service provider is currently charging to a customer in Tasmania, they will then wear your charge of $24 a month, or what was it, $500 a month at the top end of the scale.
The good news is you're a genius, but there's probably...
sorry, I'm asking Mr. Quigley a question, please.
Let me be clear about this. There are a number of what were clearly stated by the companies that were 6-month offers or 12-month offers based on...
Well, Mr. Quigley just said they would wear it.
The point I am making is that all three of these companies charge different prices. Some indicated that they were also going to have an introductory price, and they have got some very low introductory prices. And if you've paid any attention over the last 12 months at Senate estimates, I've made it clear that introductory prices in Tasmania weren't necessarily going to be the final prices that would be put into the marketplace by these companies.
Well, could I ask?
So, for instance, Internode, who are charging, I think, charging $30 for 50 meg. Yeah. That is possibly one that would be what could be described as an introductory offer to attract customers, Senator McDonald. But if you'd like to know what Internode are going to do, you perhaps might want to ask Internode.
All of these retail prices are up to the retail service providers to decide.
Exactly, Mr. Quigley. What the retail service providers are now charging me as a customer in Tasmania is a certain price. Now, come post 1st of January, whenever you get round to it, you're then going to charge them anything from $24 a month to, I think it was $500 a month, depending on the speeds up and down. Now, what I'm wanting to get from you is that your charge will either have to be added on by the retail service provider, or alternatively, they will have to wear it within the whatever pricing they've...
I think you're making an incorrect assumption, Senator, that you can draw conclusions on a trial of a small number of customers in Tasmania. I wouldn't extrapolate from that.
Well, we're not allowed by the chairman to argue, and so I'm not going to debate with you, Mr. Quigley. I just want the facts. So, up until sometime after the 1st of July, when you think it's appropriate, the right time, you're giving away for free a service which after the 1st of July you're going to charge a minimum of $24 for, and a customer would normally assume that whatever they're paying now, they'll pay $24 more later.
No, you can't assume that at all. You have to be financially illiterate to assume that, Senator McDonald.
Well, Minister, if we want to enter into an abuse name-calling thing, I'm quite happy.
No, we won't go there, Senator.
Well, I thought you might have pulled the Minister up, Mr. Chairman, in your balance.
That's why I'm saying we won't go there.
Okay.
Anyway.
So anyhow, we have those figures. I think it's fairly clear for people in Tasmania to understand that they are now getting for free something you're going to charge a minimum of $24 for into the future. And that's the point I wanted to clarify. Thank you for that. Just very briefly, before I go to my other estimates, in Townsville, the take-up, as I understand, and perhaps take-up's not the right word, was 54% last October. By the date of this article in the Townsville Bulletin, 12th of December, it was up to 57%. And I think you said earlier in your lengthy opening address that we haven't actually got in writing, so I can't check this, but you'll no doubt tell me. I think it was now up to, what did you say, 61 or something. Do you have any indication of why it's so low in Tasmania, in Townsville?
It's not so low at all. It's a fantastic take-up, Senator McDonald. A fantastic take-up rate.
I've heard what you've said about averages and take-ups in other places, so I'm asking why is the Townsville one lower than many of the others?
They're variable across different geographies. They depend on demographics, depend on a whole range of factors. There's no one simple explanation of that, Senator.
To give you an example, in Brunswick, for instance, Senator McDonald, what you'll find is a large amount of rental accommodation, which makes it harder. It's a double stage to track this down. But while you get very excited about the take-up rates, the facts are that with the Telstra deal, as we cut off copper, the only fixed line that will be available to you is the fibre connection.
Yes. Okay, so by government decree, you cut off everyone else, so you've got to go to NBN. That's what you're saying.
I think you've got it.
Sorry?
I think you've got it.
Yes.
But there has been, as you know...
I know you're proud of that, Minister, for a country, freedom of choice, land of the free.
Well, as you know...
The voters will know about this for a long time to come. But Mr Quigley,
as you would know, sorry, if I could just finish my answer, Senator McDonald. As you would know, on this point exactly, Campbell Newman, the Lord Mayor of Brisbane, recently announced that they were going to have sewer broadband. And there you are, there was a competitor, except I did notice a press statement today that Mr Lord Mayor Campbell Newman today said that the Brisbane City Council would no longer be dealing with I3 Asia Pacific as he was unhappy with the progress of the scheme. The company charged with installing this sewer system had been dumped.
Question, Mr Chairman, please.
Had been dumped. So the broadband and the sewer plan has been dumped.
Lord Mayor Campbell.
Okay.
Can I just finish my question?
Yeah, you'll get 15 seconds. We can go ask the question and we'll see if we can get an answer.
Mr Quigley, do your staff, the people you employ and engage to sell connections, have they given you any indication of why the Townsville take-up to date is lower than it is in other places?
It's not something the company's focused on. We regard 61% in Townsville as a very good number. We're in a period in which we're hopefully going to consummate a deal with Telstra which will change the landscape.
Mr Quigley, I asked you, did your staff have a reason for it? You're clearly saying no.
I'm saying there's no reason for us to be focused on that at this point. Okay. It's not something we investigate.
So your staff haven't told you what they think might be the reason? Because
I haven't asked them.
Well, thanks for that response, Mr. Quigley. It's now 1 minute past 9. We will suspend the estimates hearing until 9:16.
Perhaps while the committee assembles, since Senator Betts is here, we were asked earlier today by Senator Betts about McKinsey and McKinsey-related consultancies. Senator Betts, you referred to 3 McKinsey consultancies. We've only been able to ascertain 2.
No, only 2 McKinsey ones. I think there were 3 Ergon.
3 Egon Zehnder.
Yeah, that's right.
Consultancies. There were indeed 3 separate contracts for Egon Zehnder.
Yes.
2 McKinsey ones, as I said to, I think you referred to an $11 million one. We can't find an $11 million one, but we have one worth $25 million, which I think everyone understands in detail. And we have one which I think has got a value of close to $5 million.
5, all right, thank you.
Which is the follow-on contract. In terms of the Egon Zehnder arrangements...
have you been able to find out, and the important aspect was that the board had not been consulted or involved in relation to
the board members were not involved. although, as I understand it, since Mr Quigley's here, Mr Quigley was involved in the original, original selection of McKinsey.
Only in the very,
place.
very early stages from recollection.
Yes, you're talking about
and then only
McKinsey's originally.
Sorry, only Mr Quigley.
Only Mr Quigley.
Right.
No
McKinsey. Look, as I said...
yes.
Yeah, you might have had, I think you had a very, very early discussion about the terms of reference.
Yes, that's quite so.
Yeah.
Yes.
As I said,
no other board
I was
members.
making no allegations. It was more...
No other board members.
Late at night, can I confess to a fishing expedition just to make sure that the process was proper and kosher, and you have confirmed that it was, and I accept that at face value. Yep.
Okay, thanks.
And
Senator
thank you.
Betsam. Senator Conroy, there was some discussion about Wi-Fi and broadband early in the debate. Can I just ask you to clarify some reports I've seen about President Obama moving to an $18.7 billion wireless plan? What I've seen is that this justifies the argument against the NBN and why we should move to wireless. Can you just clarify that for me?
No, look, thanks very much, Chair. Could I draw the attention of the committee? No, I'm only giving a few edited highlights. Good try though, Eric. The chairman of Google, Eric Schmidt, was asked on the weekend at the Mobile World Conference 2011 in Barcelona, and I think it was by an Australian journalist, about the NBN. And he is quoted, he says, this is the chairman of Google, "Let me start by saying Australia is leading the world in understanding the importance of fibre. Your new Prime Minister, as part of her campaign, and now, you know, as part of her Prime Ministership, has announced that 93% of Australians, which I guess are all the folks in the cities, will have a gigabit or equivalent service using fibre, and the other 7% will be handled through wireless services of a nature of long-term evolution. This is leadership, and again from Australia, which I think is wonderful." We can quote Vince Cerf, the Vice President of Google, but more importantly one of the genuine fathers of the internet, when he told a meeting of the Internet Society of Australia, "I am so envious that you have a government that is willing to make the long-term infrastructure investment of this magnitude and of this type. I will be pushing very hard for similar activities in the US, but quite frankly, you guys are way ahead of us." We have also Mr Tim Wu, a US-based telecommunications policy advocate and author of The Master Switch, The Rise and Fall of Information Empires, says, and I quote, "I think it's a daring and fantastic plan, and yes, if it works out the way it's supposed to, I think it'll be fantastic and will set a model for the rest of the world. I think that countries that go forward with these kinds of things are going to have the advantage in the 21st century. It'll make Australia famous for something other than your athletes and Ned Kelly." And then Professor Larry Smarr, again, one of the fathers and pioneers of the internet in the United States, he said on the weekend in an article, "Obama's push for improved wireless broadband access will be of great benefit to rural communities in the US. It is a step forward, but lacks the vision of the Australian NBN. By using an appropriate combination of wireless and fibre access, Australia will become the envy of the broadband world." And there are a range of other quotes. I think Mr. Ed Wildson from Ericsson was asked again at the Barcelona conference, and the Financial Review quotes, "Demand for the NBN would surge as mobile phone providers increasingly relying on ubiquitous fibre connections to handle their customers' data." That's Ulf Ewaldson, the Vice President in charge of radio system of Ericsson. And if I can quote one more US-based commentator in the New York Times in response to the Obama plan, Stacey Higginbotham, "Relying on wireless to solve this nation's looming broadband gap is like relying on low-fat Twinkies to solve the nation's obesity problem. Mobile broadband is a poor substitute for the faster wireline broadband." And I could go on and on quoting Australians, but I thought particularly, Mr Chair, particularly... Yeah, no, I'll plead guilty as charged, but I thought particularly I should quote international, particularly US experts, to refute this argument that a range of the opposition, a range of the commentators in this country...
This answer will be finished if you don't...
A hell of a lot quicker if you stop talking.
Very wise counsel, Chair.
So I thought it was important to put on the record that while a range of commentators are making the claims that the Obama plan is the answer, experts in the US are saying the exact opposite, and those who followed President Obama's plans for some time, including Paul Buttigieg, well known here in Australia, but advised the White House, openly acknowledged that this was Plan B. Plan A was to build an NBN similar to what we were proposing, but the US Congress would not accept the concept, and so President Obama has moved in a different direction. But the issue is that you cannot, under any circumstances we've discussed earlier, have a discussion which tries to pretend that a wireless network can in any way replace a fibre network. So the evidence is in pretty extensively from overseas, despite the inability of a range of Australian commentators and the Tony Abbotts and Malcolm Turnbulls of this world, that wireless is an inferior solution to Australia's NBN. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Senator Conroy. Senator Betts.
Look, thank you very much, Mr Quigley. I understand that you, in your opening statement, you referred to 554 premises being activated in my home state of Tasmania. Is that correct?
That is correct, Senator.
Thank you. And 575 premises have requested connection.
Yes.
And that request would be through the ISP? That's correct. Or one of the 6, I understand, that there are operating in my home state of Tasmania. So one would assume that if the ISP has made such a request, then there would be something legally binding for the ISP to make that request of NBN.
When you say legally binding, between whom?
The customer
the
and the
user.
ISP.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if they're legally binding. There's normally an end user will order.
That's a fair assumption. Is it or not?
Well, we can't comment on that. The arrangements between ISPs and customers.
Yes, but
one would assume a standard commercial contract exists of some description between...
a normal, I guess, a usual contract between an end user and a telco.
Yeah, the 575...
But we don't know that for sure. We don't
but the 575 are for specific addresses.
Yes.
Yes, right. That clarifies that for me at least. So how many premises has the NBN passed by thus far?
In Tasmania? The 3 sites? 3,987.
3,987.
To say to the maths, it's about 14.5%, nearly 15%.
Right, thank you. Now, I was wondering whether an article in the Hobart Mercury, not notorious for its accuracy, well, possibly notorious for its inaccuracy.
I'm surprised you were going to be quoting the Mercury, given your stated views on it, Senator Rebecca.
Can I ask about a story that appeared on page 9, December the 1st, about a person in Midway Point who says, from day one the speed that I was getting wasn't what they said I would get. I ordered a 100 megabits per second plan and I couldn't get anywhere near it.
Yep.
At times I only get 10 megabits per second, although it might jump up to 20 megabits per second at 8 a.m. Are those sort of stories familiar to the NBN Co?
I had, heard of that event. We did investigate it.
And was it a single sole event?
This was a question of the NBN network, as you know, goes from a premise to a point of interconnect. You then have the RSP buys backhaul from wherever, from their point of interconnect to their point of presence. The result of the investigation by ourselves and the RSP indicated that link, that backhaul link from the Poi to the POP, was underdimensioned. So the problem was solved
whatever
when the
all those
RSP...
acronyms mean, I thought defence was bad enough.
when the RSP increased the backhaul capacity between the point of interconnect where we handed the traffic off to their point of presence, the problem went away.
And your backhaul provider was Aurora Energy?
That's not our backhaul provider, it's the RSP's backhaul provider.
No, I think what happens is an RSP purchases a certain amount from the backhaul provider, and if the RSP doesn't purchase enough to support the connection that they've sold, then you'll get not necessarily the full capacity, which is what was being experienced here. Once the RSP purchased more backhaul capacity, then the speed problem was eliminated and the service was provided as had been purchased by the customer from the RSP. But what the investigation showed was that the NBN network was performing exactly to specifications.
And we checked with the end user. They were perfectly happy after the RSP increased the backhaul capacity.
And the RSP, this happened on a number of occasions across a couple of different households and I think a school as well. And the problem was the same RSP who were...
That is the Circular Head Christian School?
Yes.
Right.
This was the same problem. Once the
it's not often you're on the ball, Minister.
Once the RSP purchased a greater amount of backhaul, the problem was solved. And to give you an example, a adjoining Catholic school, which I'm sure you're familiar with,
Peter Chanel,
right across the road, had a different backhaul provider who had purchased sufficient backhaul, had a different RSP, purchased sufficient backhaul and were receiving exactly the 100 megs that they were paying for.
And the more backhaul capacity, if I can use that term, the greater the expense, or not?
Well, one of the issues in Tasmania, as you know, Senator Betts, is that because up until very recently there's only been one backhaul provider across the Bass Strait, which was Telstra. It's the reason that Tasmania's had some of the slowest and most expensive broadband in the country. It is also one of the reasons we started in Tasmania, because this is the toughest market, because it has been so poorly served in the past. And so as the backhaul capacity has been improving in recent times, the prices are getting cheaper. To give you an example, that Catholic school, they sent me an email in response to the Christian Brothers, the
Circular Head
Christian School next door, and they said we used to pay $60,000 for our broadband connection. Today, using the NBN and Primus RSP, we are now charged $1,400, more than $58,000 saving to the Catholic school because of the NBN.
Yeah. In fact, Senator, you may be interested, I can leave these with you. There are two testimonials from the two schools involved who are saying what they're now using it for, which we've produced. They were delighted to talk about it.
Colour brochures are more inconvenient at this time of night. Thank you very much, Mr. Quigley. So these are... And so when were these produced?
Well, we in fact, I think got contacted by the two schools who were thrilled about what they could now do with the service we're providing at NBN, do things that they haven't done. By the way, I have a few more testimonials from people who are screen printers, all sorts of things, that opportunities opening up.
In Tasmania.
In Tasmania.
You might take them on notice.
Very, very costly, very costly.
No, really cheap.
No? Oh, cheap. Very good. All right, well, look, thank you for that. I will read these at my leisure. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Betts.
For us, Senator Burnham.
Yeah, well, can I go to Senator Ludlam first? He's been patiently waiting.
Just a bit unlike me. I'll kick off with a couple. Mr. Quigley, in your opening comments, you spoke a bit about how you're working with Telstra on some specific issues around access to their infrastructure. I'm a bit perplexed as to how you're able to do that when Telstra's shareholders haven't yet signed off on the deal. So can you just maybe spell out a bit more detail for us how, in what manner you're working with Telstra on infrastructure sharing? when that hasn't gone by?
Well, we're already working with Telstra under facilities, the normal facilities access agreement in Brunswick to use their ducts. I mean, this is people can buy it. Now, clearly, the prices and the commercial conditions are somewhat different from what you'd do if you're doing a huge deal, such as the financial heads of agreements contemplate. But you can still use their facilities. And when we are working with them, we obviously can do planning together. We can plan, for example, for the 122 points of interconnect now that the ACCC has specified, we can look at the Telstra facilities such as exchanges and backhaul capacity and say, OK, how are we now going to configure the network so that we can put our points of interconnect reusing the maximum amount of exchange space, duct space, all of the facilities that we hope to use to maximise the amount of existing infrastructure that we do use. We can have all those discussions. Now, they're all subject to approval, ultimately, by shareholders. The two shareholders, by the way, that any deal we do has to be approved by the two shareholders, by the boards and then the shareholders. But we can still do a lot of planning on that basis, on the assumption that the deal will proceed forward.
What about the first release sites and the places that you're physically installing the infrastructure right now?
Well, we had to proceed. I mean, we started those quite some time ago, and such as in Brunswick, where we are using Telstra facilities. In Wollonga, we chose that because it's a very attractive little town in South Australia in which we knew we couldn't do overhead. We had to do underground, so we did the ducting and boring and all of that. So we chose different sites to get a range of different techniques to test them all. So we've done those without Telstra's cooperation. In other words, we're not using Telstra's ducts in Wollonga.
Has there been any... I know this was canvassed a little bit earlier by coalition senators, but what kind of work have you done on network resilience, particularly in relation to kind of horrific series of disasters that seems to be overtaking us in serial? What is more robust for... I realise that most of your distribution network is going to be underground, but even for the last mile, is there any further studies or work that's been done?
We put a lot of work into the overall resilience and done some quite sophisticated availability calculations. We have someone inside the company who is an expert in doing network modelling and looking at reliability of every element that goes into the network and doing calculations, building a model and doing calculations of what the overall end-to-end availability would be. So for example, if you look at the maps we have of our transit network, which is the transmission links that link up points of interconnects out to fan sites, you'll see they're built in rings. The reason they're built in rings is if any one side of the ring fails, you can still get the traffic back from the fibre access node back to the point of interconnect. So you can go in telecom networks, you generally do that type of thing. You look for single points of failure and you try to eliminate them. Obviously, there's a point at which you can't do that because it gets too expensive when you get further and further out towards the end customer. So we have absolutely taken seriously the need for resilience and redundancy.
Are all of the connections from the street up the front yard into the house going to be overhead cables like the existing power network?
No, absolutely not. In fact, part of the deal with Telstra that we hope to consummate is to reuse a substantial number of their underground conduits.
Okay.
Now, our general philosophy will be where the services are underground, we use underground today. If they are, in fact, overhead, and for example, there's a substantial proportion of the copper network that drops from poles, we'll probably use, in those cases, aerial drops.
Yeah, so is there any reason why you wouldn't do more trenching for that last little segment from the street to the house?
It's an expensive proposition to keep trenching, and not everybody wants to have. Some people simply don't want to have their garden trenched.
Yeah.
They prefer to have an overhead drop. On the question of, by the way, reliability of overhead versus underground, we have spoken to some very big players in the world, particularly Verizon, who said it's not an obvious question. It's not the case that necessarily underground is going to give you higher availability, because while you may be less likely to have a failure in underground, the time to repair is higher. You can fix an overhead faster than you can fix underground. So when you look at the overall availability of the network, you shouldn't make the assumption that underground's definitely better.
This is the first opportunity that we've had to speak to you since the disasters that overtook Queensland. Where is your thinking on whether copper will go back into the areas that were wiped out, or whether you would put fibre in, and presumably you're balancing duplication of effort against time of reconnection?
Yes. And that's a straight... I did, in fact, make the offer to Telstra's CEO that anything we could do to help, we would be delighted to. But, of course, Telstra's a very capable company who are well used to dealing with events such as those. I think it's up to them to decide. It's not often, in fact, almost always, the fastest way to restore service is the same service.
Yeah.
So replace copper with copper or remediate the copper that has been damaged.
So has there been any material impact on your rollout schedule?
No.
No. Okay, so as far as you're aware, it'll be the copper going back in, just get the services back up and running?
Yes, that's the I mean, that was Telstra's, of course, priority, to get services turned on as fast as possible.
Can you tell us, and I don't know whether this is one for the Minister or one for you, Mr Quigley, what's happening with we still haven't seen a Greenfields bill presented to the Parliament, and that's now, I think, well over a year in delay. What is going on in fringe developments and Greenfields estates at the moment with regards to this infrastructure?
I think you read something out earlier about it.
Yes, we have assumed, in fact the government's statement of expectations makes it clear that they would like us to take on the responsibility effectively for the wholesale obligation to provide a service into broadacre and infill developments. That means places already within the copper footprint for where there are more than 100 premises. The aim there, of course, the government, is to try and make sure we're putting fibre in instead of continuing to put copper in. Now, that doesn't make sense. Why we've excluded, obviously, the very small infill areas is because you can't simply build a fibre network all over the place. You can do it for if it's a big enough area, and we go in and we do it, and that's what the greenfield arrangements are all about. Now, having said that, it's of course not easy. It's quite an engineering job to execute on that, which is what the company is now doing.
So how much of that is dependent on legislation coming through here? This whole show operated for quite some time without anything at all coming through Parliament. Well, how are you managing the Greenfields arrangements?
We're proceeding on the basis of the instructions the government has given us, and we're working cooperatively with Telstra on that transition, and we've had discussions for quite some time with developers, so we're proceeding.
All right. Can you tell us, maybe this one is for you, Minister, what the status of discussions around the universal service obligation, the USO, is? Where is that, and have you thought of a better name for the company?
Well, look, NBN stuck. NBN Co stuck.
We're stuck with NBN Co. But on a serious note, I feel as though there's a quite serious ambiguity around the way in which the universal service obligation is going to work and how you're going to phase it out, or if you are.
Yeah, just in terms of where we're up to.
Do you want to give a sort of general description? Senator, as I'm sure you know, the creation of what I will have to call USOCO, because we've got no better name for it, the creation of that entity to effectively take on network obligations which are going to be or need a new home as a result of the agreements we've struck with Telstra and the passage of the Competition and Consumer Safeguards Bill resulting in structural separation, effectively meaning there are network obligations that will no longer be capable of being delivered by Telstra over the rollout period, and therefore they need a new home. They'll be parcelled up and put inside the USO co-entity. The government has committed to putting in, on a long-term basis, $100 million per year, although in the first 2 years it's a smaller amount. And their current negotiation with Telstra is attempting to finalise enough detail around the proposition that is inherent in the agreements struck with Telstra that we can put that to a consultation process with other parts of industry. The funding arrangements, as you know, for the current universal service obligation involve industry effectively contributing to that cost as Telstra maintains it, and the expectation is that over the longer term, as USOCO takes over responsibility for maintaining network obligations, the industry will continue to contribute to those and as I said, we need a sufficiency of detail to go into a effective consultation with the remaining parts of industry. We expect to do that, obviously, well before the Telstra agreements are put in front of their shareholders for purposes of endorsement, and that's obviously going to happen in the second quarter of this year. So the consultation process will take place early in that second quarter.
Are we going to see a USO co-bill or something of that order?
There is a legislative requirement. Perhaps I'll get one of my colleagues to describe the nature of the bill construct.
The bill's still being drafted, but there will be a new scheme to give effect to the USO co-arrangement. Sorry, it's Marianne Cullen from the Department of Broadband Communications and the Digital Economy. The bill will provide for USO co to deliver a number of the government's public policy objectives, as the Secretary has outlined, including ensuring all Australians have reasonable access to a standard telephone service, that they're ensuring that payphones are reasonably accessible to all Australians, that there are appropriate emergency call handling arrangements and arrangements for the National Relay Service, that there are mechanisms in place to assist the migration of customers that currently have a voice-only service from the copper network to the fibre-based service as Telstra's copper exchanges are decommissioned, and to fund research and development for technological solutions to ensure the continuity of public interest services such as public alarms in buildings and traffic lights. USO Co will also have responsibility for ensuring the delivery of voice telephony and payphone services, as I said, within the NBN fibre coverage areas from the point at which they're progressively migrated to the NBN, and outside NBN fibre coverage areas from 1 July 2014. Telstra will, under these arrangements, continue to be subject to consumer safeguards in the same way as that they apply to all carriers. An important difference in the reform is that USOCO's focus will be on contracting with third parties for the delivery of the universal service outcomes and the public interest services. Initially, in order to provide continuity for consumers, this will involve entering into contracts with Telstra for the delivery of the services, but over time it's expected that USOCO will seek to engage other providers to deliver these services. And that under this approach, we're seeking to ensure effective consumer safeguards remain in place during the transition to the NBN. I think it's also important to point out that the government released a public policy statement outlining this in the Broad in June 2010, and then conducted or issued a discussion paper on the issues raised in that public policy statement in October, and conducted public consultation on that.
So how close would you say the government is to finalising its thinking on how USOCO, or whatever we call it, is going to work?
The arrangements are being finalised as part of the overall deal that's being negotiated with Telstra.
Yeah.
I think that Telstra has indicated that it wishes to put that to a shareholder vote on the 1st of July this year, and so the arrangements will need to be finalised before then.
Will there be an exposure draft of that bill as there was for the companies and access bills?
That's currently the proposal, yes.
Yeah. Okay, I'll just put on the record that I think it's a good process.
Yeah, no, I'm fairly confident there'll be an exposure draft.
Okay. So eventually, though, and when I talked before about phasing out the USO, that's a pretty loose language. I guess I meant phasing out payments to Telstra, and you've described in a little bit more detail what you mean. To what degree will NBN Co eventually be taking on those obligations of providing us, setting the payphone argument aside for a second, with the ability to make a phone call, which is effectively what the USO mandates at the moment?
NBN Co doesn't have the capacity to be a retail provider, and it doesn't have the capacity to individually provide phone services. It provides a port, as I've often been asked and described, that for people who just want essentially a phone voice service, you'll be able to unplug from the wall and plug into the port on the
network terminating unit.
NTU. So people will continue to have that capacity, but NBN Co don't provide that as a
No, you'll still be getting a bill from a retailer.
Sorry?
For that, plug your phone into the wall, you still get a bill from a retailer. So I don't understand, is the USO, is that obligation split between wholesale and retail? It is. So some portion of that obligation does rest with NBN Co.
Well, they provide the NTU.
Yeah.
But it's the NTU has how many, 6 ports?
No, it has 4 data ports.
4 data
and
ports.
2 voice analogue terminal adapters that will take a normal telephone.
All right. Now, one of the issues that's been raised and got a bit of press late last year was the idea that at the moment, if the electricity network gets knocked over, you can still make a landline call, and that's not the case with the fibre network. And so there's a proposition that each one of the NTUs, I presume, has a battery in it.
Has a battery backup facility. It's a
All right.
separate unit, but it's a battery backup facility.
Can we go into a little bit of detail about how many batteries that means? Who's going to be responsible for replacing them, and who's going to recycle millions of these things every couple of years? Because this is some turnover that doesn't exist at the moment.
Yes, it's something that I think just about every telco in the world is doing that I know of. And yes, there is a battery which lasts for some years in the battery backup. We will provide that battery initially, but after that it will be the responsibility of the retail service provider and their arrangements with the end customer. And we will provide an alarm facility which will signal back to the retail service provider and also to us if that battery is coming to the end of its life.
Who's going to maintain responsibility for recycling the batteries?
That's with the retail service provider.
Sorry, can I just...
Please.
The government has committed that it will consult with stakeholders on the appropriate way of ensuring access to battery backup services, including examining environmental and emergency services issues. We're currently in the process of designing an appropriate stakeholder consultation process in the department and expect that to happen in the next couple of months. So it is an issue that's certainly alive, but that's a responsibility that we in the department have rather than NBN Co.
Okay, that's helpful. If the power does go out, how long will your system stay live for on one of these batteries?
It depends on the usage, of course, and we've assumed, I think the design specs at the moment, I have to check for certain, I think it's a minimum of 3 hours. It could be, I may be wrong there, maybe 5. I can't remember if it's 3 or 5 hours that the NTU will last. We're also looking at investigating the possibility that there is a reserve that can't be tapped until somebody overrides in the case of an emergency. So that's actually...
You could still make a phone call even if the thing's gone dead. You could still make a phone call,
so you can't. You have to actually physically press the additional button, which is to be used to make sure that you reserve
break in
some
case
capacity.
of emergency.
Sounds a bit
break
like
glass
that.
in case of emergencies.
Now, that is what we're investigating at the moment. It seems a sensible thing, obviously, to do.
Will the RSP get access to that port no matter what plan the customer's on? Is that
yes,
everybody?
that comes with the basic, absolutely the basic service, has access to that port.
How does it work in the case of the folk getting wireless or satellite? Presumably they're not affected by this issue at all.
No, that's we don't provide those ports. But by the way, I need to make clear, which I think is something that it's going to have to be some more education on. When people are using a cordless phone, it doesn't work when the power goes out. So there's a lot of people using cordless phones. So in the case of satellite, well, we're not providing a voice service with a satellite service because of latency issues.
All right. And just to confirm...
if I could just clarify, though, when Mr Quigley says NBN Co are providing a voice service, you can still use VoIP on the satellite service. So you can still make a phone call, but NBN Co aren't plugging in a piece of fibre or a piece of copper to allow a voice service. So it's
not a normal analogue.
Sometimes the way it's described, you still get a voice service using VoIP.
We're all going to be using VoIP in 10 or 15 years' time?
Yes.
The technicality of that is true, but just in terms of how it's described, often people don't quite follow that technicality.
We don't provide the VoIP service per se. It's the retail service provider who provides that. We provide the capability to carry the voice packets, the VoIP packets.
All right. And just to confirm your answer to the previous question right now, it doesn't matter how basic your service is, you won't be charged extra for that battery turnover business by the...
No.
Okay.
Sorry, we're not charging extra for that battery backup facility.
It's part of the basic package.
Basic service.
Whether you're using data services or not.
Yes, correct.
Thank you.
For the actual battery as well. So
the battery comes
is turned over when the alarm goes off
in some years' time. That's obviously, Marion has said there's an investigation going on, but at this point in time, the arrangements we have with the retail service provider, unless something else comes along, the government wants to put in place, that after the first battery, we supply the first battery, subsequent batteries are with the retail service provider, subject to the government's ongoing investigations.
Which isn't...
So the retail service provider will presumably, at that time, arrange to send a battery and add the cost of it to your bill.
They may decide to replace it as part of the overall service, but that's up to them.
Yeah, but they're going to recoup the cost one way or another.
They have overall costs, yes, I guess they will.
Has anybody made an estimate of how many batteries are going to need to be replaced on an annual turnover cycle? It's a couple of million, right?
Yes, on an annual basis. I mean, we will be providing, throughout the rollout period, battery backup to a large number of premises.
At what point are you going to be pushing the button? Presumably you're already installing these things. You've got first release sites all over the country. What decision, what kind of batteries, and sorry to harp on this, but because I realise it's kind of at the margins at the moment, but once we have millions of these things being turfed every year, well into once the thing is built,
yes,
I'm concerned that we don't open up another stream of toxic e-waste that wasn't thought through when we could have made the decisions now. What are you using in the NTUs that are currently deployed?
I'll have to get back. I believe it's a
battery's not physically contained in the NTU. It's in a separate
unit.
I haven't seen one of these things. I'll take your word for it.
Unit.
Senator Holden, can I just draw your attention to the time? Senator Troth is waiting for the call, so if you could maybe think about winding up shortly.
I will wind up shortly and I'll come back later if there's a little bit of time. Now, I realise it must be an excruciating temptation to send this out to Liberal seats last, but there was an article on the Delimited blog that ran a couple of weeks ago asking the question of, we've been focusing on who gets the NBN first, and the question in this piece was, who gets it last? Who gets it? Who's getting high-speed broadband 9 years after the first sites went into the ground? What's your thinking around that question?
I'm afraid to say, Stephen, I haven't given it any thought at all. What we're focused on now is where we can start. I mean, we obviously have the second release sites that have been announced. We're trying to now accommodate some, various factors. We're trying to accommodate at one time. The necessity to do greenfields is a priority. The obvious focus on rural and regional Australia, and a big issue, of course, is the change to the 122 points of interconnect and where we can actually put those points of interconnect in utilising the facilities that we are hoping to get from Telstra, which means we have some constraints there which will limit what we can do at what time. Some exchanges have space available that we can use, others need to have make-ready worked on them. Some of them we have to build new points of interconnect.
At what point will you be in a position to publish the rollout schedule for the whole country?
We won't be anticipating publishing the entire rollout schedule. We'd anticipate publishing it once it's clear to us when we can get the facilities, assuming the deal is done with Telstra. That will dictate to some extent where we can go and when.
All right.
Folks, I think it would be unfair to punish the electorates of MPs who vote against it in the Parliament, but I'm certainly willing to entertain a proposition that those who voted against it can sign a consent form to go last.
Individual houses? Individual
households, for, say, Senator Fisher, she could sign up to get it last.
I'd be happy with that more fine-grained approach rather than a
I wouldn't want to punish the voters of South Australia just because Senator Fisher's done everything she can to frustrate the rollout in South Australia.
Chair, I've got about 10 minutes more, but I might come back later if there's time.
Yeah, I think... Yep, thanks. Senator Truth.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Mr Quigley, I think you mentioned in your opening remarks that, or perhaps the Minister did, that NBN has signed up 50% of households in the Melbourne suburb of Brunswick. One of you did mention that.
Yes, that's
correct.
Correct. Now, when we say signed up, they have consented to have a connection to their house dropped in.
Yes, right. Now, of the various localities that you described, that was easily the lowest.
Yes, that
I
is
know
right.
it's half. It's whether it's half full or half empty. So, in a very densely populated area, wouldn't you agree that number is comparatively low, and why would it be so low?
No, as I think the Minister had mentioned, there's a high percentage of rental properties in that area, and that's you've got to go through a more complex process to get consent forms because the renter isn't the person who can consent.
All right.
They have to go to the landlord.
So, what percentage of households of that would you expect to actually purchase the packages?
That I can't tell you at this point in time. And remember, all of this becomes a bit mute when, if and when the Telstra deal is executed.
Because, as I've said earlier, with the Telstra agreement, we actually cut off the existing copper network.
Yes, I understand that.
And so the only way to make to have a broadband service or to make a call on a fixed line network would essentially be to take. Essentially we will have, barring a small amount of possibly HFC from Optus, we would have virtually 100% of the fixed lines going into every home in the footprint.
After a certain time?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be done region by region.
Right.
Just on the rental property issue, if I may, Senator Troth, when did you first start approaching the premises of Brunswick?
When did we first start? I don't recall. I don't. I'll have to give you.
And I mean, what is that communication process to get that approval?
We have quite a sophisticated process of mailing out information, little forms, saying, look, this is what's happening, this is what we'll be doing over the time. There will be a consent form that we'll be sending around to you in due course. We've run information days in each one of these first release sites. We did that some months ago so that people could come along, ask questions. So it was, as you would expect, a normal community consultation program.
So without a precise date, but this
some
has been running for some months, 3, 4...
Yeah. I think there was a photo of you, Minister, turning the first sod in Brunswick, if I remember.
No, I haven't actually been to the Brunswick site.
Right. Somebody turned the first sod.
No, unfortunately, given that it's an inner suburb, there's no sod to be turned.
Oh, really?
And we're actually accessing...
a cobblestone to be dug up.
Well, we're actually accessing the Telstra, because we started late. One of the reasons is we started late because we were negotiating with Telstra to use all the underground capacity ducting of Telstra. So I wasn't turning a sod in Brunswick. I've turned a few other sods, but not in Brunswick.
Yes, I can well imagine.
And we have lots more to turn.
Right. Not only would there be the issue of rental properties per se, even imagining a single level, dwelling, but there would also be the need to negotiate with landlords of multi-dwelling units, would there not? Now,
that's an issue, though, to be fair, right across Australia, that we have a separate strategy.
No, I understand that. But
NBN have a separate strategy for...
Given that this is a test site, wouldn't there be higher administrative cost in doing that?
In multi-dwelling units?
Yes.
No, not necessarily. In fact, you have the advantage, of course, you're dealing then, in most cases, with a body corporate.
Right.
And you can then look at putting a particular unit as you go through and roll out the network, putting this possible connection located so that you can get to every unit in there. You may even put, if the multi-dwelling unit is big enough, you may put a piece of equipment in the basement. So that we're working on right now. There's a lot of work we're doing, in fact, some trials of that, separate to the first release sites.
All right. Now, the McKinsey report notes that more than 30% of Australian households are part of multi-dwelling units. And is there a shortfall of knowledge and experience that can be gained from rolling out to rural and regional areas which have much lower percentages of multi-dwelling units?
Sorry,
I mean, if you're concentrating on these sites such as Brunswick, I'll start again. The priority is going to be rural and regional areas, I take it. Is that correct or not?
We're doing a mixture. If you're talking about the first release sites, there's a mixture. There's Brunswick, which is an inner city suburb.
Yeah.
There's Wollonga, which is a small rural town. There's Townsville, which is a suburb in Townsville. There's Keimer Downs, which is 2 hours south of Sydney. So we have a mixture,
so
both rural and metropolitan.
That was actually the strategy. Was
across the board, you're getting a variety of experiences and skills being developed.
Yes.
Okay. Well, but on the sites that you've mentioned, you're still prioritising rural and regional Australia. Is that correct or not?
Yes, certainly. And all the work we're doing, the announcement that was made on the acquisition of the spectrum is so that we can advance the wireless build. We clearly are in the announcements we made on the second release sites. You would see there's quite a number of them that are in rural and regional Australia. Now, of course, in executing on the Telstra deal, which I think everybody understands that's in the best interest to reuse existing infrastructure, that is going to be a constraint on what we can do where, depending on which facilities are available at which times.
Okay. I still see a bit of a disconnect between prioritising rural and regional Australia, though, and having the skills and expertise to do the multi-dwelling units, but perhaps that's something that will correlate later on.
Yeah, look, I think the intention is to have 31 construction sites, if I can use that phrase very loosely, at the same time, and there is a mix. I mean, at the moment there is Tasmania, which we've done some small towns. We've also done some suburbs. And that will continue to evolve. Wollonga is, as Mr Quigley said, a small town, beautiful town. I invite you to go and visit it. And Armidale was just there last week. But Townsville, which I've also visited, and Minnamurra, Keimer Downs, they're all different, but we're going to have a mixture right across Australia. 31 sites is a lot of sites, and I think we'll be able to cover off on all the skill sets that need to be developed and grown.
So that'll be advancing
process.
at an incremental rate as you deal with the variety of sites.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, I think you mentioned educational and promotional campaigns in areas such as Brunswick, and I think you mentioned you did hold one or more.
Yes, I don't know how many. We certainly hold at least one in every site.
Right.
First release site.
So how many people would have attended that?
They varied. We get, in fact, in some we get quite large numbers of people.
No, look, I'm sure some of that information is available. I'm sure we take that on notice. It's just they were all last year, so it was a little while ago.
Yes, I'd be interested to know, especially if there were more than one, whether the interest did build or whatever. Mm-hmm. Okay? Thank you.
If I can just pick up there, although I will for the sake of the record, so the invitation stands to Senator Troth anytime she wants for a Saturday morning brunch at the Wollonga Farmers Market.
It is very, very nice.
Lovely.
In fact, that's where we held the open day.
You turned a sod, was it, Minister?
Yeah, that's where we held the open day, the market.
Right.
Indeed, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Can I go back just partly to the communications effort and the challenges of getting into access to some properties as against others? Mr Quigley, you said, sort of alluded, some of these things will change with the Telstra deal because, of course, there's a consequence of not accepting NBN co access, but there still will need to be approval for you to connect, won't there?
At this point in time, we're anticipating one way or another there'll be arrangements in place so that as the copper network is decommissioned, we will replace it with the fibre. Our expectation is that most people who've got a fixed line will want to keep a fixed line and will be quite happy to have that fibre instead of the copper connection.
I'm sure most people will, but the fact that in somewhere like Brunswick, where you've been at it for several months and you've only got 50% of premises approving a connection at this stage, and now there's no consequence of not having a connection at this stage, and so you're right to highlight that as an issue. But if you're identifying a particular problem and communicating with landlords of rental properties, there's a consequence for them eventually of unhappy tenants, but the communication problem gets no easier.
There's the consequences of lower rents.
Yes.
Homes that don't have a fixed line / the fibre broadband will ultimately end up not being able to charge as much rent. So there will be a financial incentive.
But in the initial stages of the communication, which seems to be an issue NBN is having,
let's be very clear. 50% in Brunswick is a fantastic take-up, just like the 87% in Armidale is a fantastic take-up, and the 84% in Wollonga is a fantastic take-up. This is a tremendous response for when we don't even have a product to sell to them because the RSPs are not marketing. So we consider this to be a very, very positive response.
Don't undersell yourself, Minister. Mr Quigley said it was 91% in Wollonga.
It's gone up. Sorry.
But why is 50% in Brunswick a fantastic result compared to 91% in Wollonga? These sites were all announced at the same time. The
Brunswick started last because Brunswick was a different negotiation. Brunswick was a negotiation with Telstra, which took longer because it wasn't included as part of the NBN deal. So it took longer. It started the last. So it has the highest density of rental accommodation. There are two very simple reasons why you get a different response. But one of the things that we picked different sites with different types of topography and size, shape and positioning was to learn these experiences. But I repeat, this argument is ultimately futile. If an individual down the track wants to make a phone call or use broadband on a fixed line, their only ultimate choice, barring a small proportion potentially of Optus customers on HFC, will be on the NBN network. We'll have virtually 100% of fixed line connections in Australia. It's in the fibre footprint. It's just that simple.
I understand that will be their only choice. Of course, there is also growing data of the number of people choosing not to have fixed line as well. And
well, you shouldn't be. I'm glad you raised that because I'm glad you raised that. And if you read the NBN business plan, it's actually been misinterpreted, and Mr. Quigley might want to add to this. But when people quote that 11 or 12% of people have abandoned fixed line, that actually includes 4% of people who are using what is referred to as naked DSL. They've stopped paying the $30 a month line rental, but they're still using the fixed line. The actual figure is only 7%. So it's often stated that going to 16% is a terrible underestimate, but that's because people have not read correctly the data that's available. The current figure is around 7 to 8%. So Mr. Quigley often says we've doubled that to 16%. But what's important is that people just haven't read all the details, and that 4% are actually still using a fixed line. It's referred to in the jargon as naked DSL. I'm sure you've heard of it.
But it's still a figure that's growing.
And it's a figure that it's a figure that we factored in as doubling. It's a figure that we factored in as doubling.
Both those figures are growing.
Yeah. Although I would also refer to that Analysis Mason study, which says some of those trends are starting to go the other way as the amount of mobile data is going up. People are predicting now 75% of mobile data is going to be used in the home. So, as I said before, there'll be a real interest from the mobile telcos to get that traffic that's mobile data
they will want to sell a bundled
Wi-Fi network.
They'll actually want to sell a bundled product.
Yeah.
Yep.
In other words, you have both.
Yes.
That's exactly right.
Appreciate
what
bundling is. Can I go to something that I do want some clarification on? In talking about apartments and multi-unit dwellings, Mr. Quigley, when you spoke of putting a facility in the basement of somewhere large, that would be fibre to the cabinet type architecture in terms of the terminology?
That would be what we call a fibre distribution hub. Right. So as you fan the fibres out from a fibre access node, which has the active equipment, you go out to what's called a fibre distribution hub, where there are splitters which split the fibre. That's what GPON is all about. And those fibre distribution hubs are normally located in an area serving about 200 premises, and they're in a cabinet on the side of the road. They're completely passive, which is completely different to fibre to the node. This is not the same technology. What we're saying is, if there's a big enough multi-dwelling unit, we may put one of those fibre distribution hubs, in other words, the passive splitters, in the basement to feed all of the units in that multi-dwelling unit.
A bit like what Korea are doing at the moment.
So, in relation to multi-dwelling units, it will be fibre to the apartment in all instances?
There'll be fibre to the premise. Yes. Each individual premise.
Individual premise, apartment.
Not fibre to the node. So it's not fibre to the apartment and then copper from there. It is fibre to every apartment.
NBN Co is the one covering all of the costs of however many apartments, however many premises in those multi-dwelling units, just to be very clear in that regard. Okay, can I see how we go on this regard? Can I skip over to some issues relating to the Telstra agreement and some related matters? Will the NBN Co have any say over how long Telstra has to keep its copper network operating?
As part of the agreement within the fibre footprint, and I'd distinguish these two parts. There's the fibre footprint, in which the copper network's being retired, and then there's the remainder of the copper, which is in the part that we won't be fibring, which is part of what was talked about before with USOCO. Yes, there are clauses in the agreement with Telstra about how that transition will take place.
But I hope you're not going to seek any confidential information and waste everyone's time with that argument.
Oh, well, see, I have no doubt, Minister, that you won't be shy in telling me when you're not going to answer a question. We've had plenty of experience with that. Is there a time limit that Telstra can keep its wholesale HFC internet customers on after the NBN's rolled out in a certain region?
We have an agreement, as I might have mentioned, the agreement is for voice services and broadband services on the HFC to be retired, but obviously the pay TV service on the HFC can continue. And there are some timeframes, as we've discussed with Telstra, about that transition.
In terms of those two issues, in terms of the copper network and HFC, in both those instances, or in the copper instance where it's going to be terminated, at what point do you envisage termination? Is it literally, we've connected you, now you're going to be terminated, or is there a timeline?
No, those details are part of commercial negotiations that are ongoing with Telstra. I'm sure when they make their announcements to the shareholder, they may choose to make that information public.
Okay. So there will be some overlap period.
Of course, there has to be. From an engineering sense, there has to be an overlap. And, by the way, on the copper network, it's not just voice services. There are obviously DSL services, and there are what are called special services, the whole range of services. Each one needs to be considered about how it would be migrated. Alarm services, PAPLs, a whole range of different types of migration scenarios, which we are working through in exquisite detail at the moment.
And is it a consistent time frame for HFC customers, internet customers, to switch over?
Probably I shouldn't comment on the details of the agreement.
There are ongoing discussions which are relevant here. We're not trying to withhold. As you can see, we've been very helpful with information, Mr Quigley, as always. But there's just some information that we cannot, for commercial reasons, reveal.
Okay. Minister, you recently said that, and I think you've repeated it tonight in response to Senator Ludlam, that people who want a home phone service will not have to pay a cent when the fibre optic cable is connected to their house.
It's quite a small optic cable that connects to the house.
Sorry?
It's quite a small optic cable that connects to the house, not a big optic cable.
I didn't say big. I said when the fibre optic cable.
Sounded like big to me, but Mr Quigley.
Sorry. Okay. I wasn't trying to work on the size basis of the cable. That's a correct statement?
Yeah. I think part of the agreement that NBN Co has reached with Telstra is to incorporate all of the... people might want to help me out here. I'm not totally au fait with it, but the agreement is that people who currently have just a voice line will continue to have the voice line at the same price.
Yes, we have an arrangement with Telstra whereby we're making sure that we look after people with a voice-only service. So you're probably aware in the market today, if it's a voice-only line, there isn't much margin between the $24 basic service offering that we're providing and that voice-only service that Telstra would provide, particularly to those people who are on a special rates, lower rates.
Low income. Mm-hmm.
Low income and disadvantaged people. So during the course of our arrangements with Telstra, we have negotiated the way in which that can be taken care of.
So Telstra will continue to provide those services to all of those voice-only customers?
Telstra retain the universal service obligation at the retail level.
Mm-hmm. Okay. In relation to other users who choose to connect, will there be a connection fee that they face?
We haven't anticipated that in our business plan. What we've assumed is the pricing and products as we laid out in the corporate plan.
Okay. Of course.
Now, by the way, we're talking about, once again, I have to keep stressing,
yes,
we are wholesale.
Yep.
Retailers will do what retailers choose to do.
Okay. So retailers are free to charge.
The good news is that for the first time we'll have real competition among retail service providers.
Thank you, Minister. So retailers will be free to charge a connection fee if they wish?
Not up to NBN Co to dictate to retailers how they operate in the market.
Does NBN Co in your wholesale plans charge a connection fee for retailers?
We don't anticipate. We haven't talked about that in the corporate plan.
Do you anticipate doing so?
Don't anticipate at this point doing so.
No. So it will be a flat service for the package of download volumes, or
we will provide a service on a wholesale level. It could be, and this is something we're working on at the moment, if somebody lies outside the fibre footprint and yet they still want to get a fibre service, we anticipate this is going to happen, by the way, that we may have an arrangement where they could pay an additional amount to cover the differences in the costs.
But they're not in the 93% footprint that we're talking about.
And we would offer them a fixed wireless service, of course, or a satellite service. They may choose to want to have, and we anticipate there may be groups of people who may live on, for example, bigger lots that are not in the 93% footprint, who may want to get together and say, will you please run a fibre? We'll pay for the additional cost for that. We're working on a process that allows that to happen.
Okay. So it does, I mean, that would strike me as being a fairly expensive proposition for many people, or are you envisaging there are situations where for some reason there's fibre already down the road, but there are particular houses that you're just missing?
No, I think if you can imagine the edges of, for example, towns, people would be interested in asking us to extend the fibre out further. Now, it's not planned in our 93% footprint, but we anticipate people will want us to do that. We're already getting requests even in the first release sites to do that.
Okay. So, to be clear, for 93%, as it is, unless for some strange reason a retail service provider decided to have their own connection fee, there's not an upfront fee passed on to them that they're likely to be passing on to consumers.
We don't anticipate that this time. Now, the reason I'm just a little cautious is our whole pricing construct we embed in a special access undertaking which we submit to the ACCC, and we have yet to go through that process of getting that approved. They can make some decisions. They could decide they would like us to do X, Y, or Z, and we'll obviously need to respond to that.
The pricing structure, will that be pricing structure that retailers offer, will there be a requirement where retailers are operating in different areas for them to offer uniform retail pricing across those areas?
We offer uniform national pricing at the wholesale level. We don't even begin to presume to tell retail service providers how they should price or what they should do. We're building a utility network that they can use. We expect there to be substantial competition at the retail level. We think the market should work at that level.
Okay.
It's not up to us to dictate to them how to structure price. In fact, what we've done, and I have to say that the retail service providers seem to be extremely happy with it, we've provided them all the flexibility we can, and we've made no presumptions about how they may want to use it. And I think they appreciate that, the fact that we're not making any judgments on how they should do things. Let the market work at that retail level.
So a retail service provider can, either if they think they have higher costs in servicing a particular area for whatever reason, pass those on. Equally, if they think they can get a higher margin out of a particular area, go your hardest.
That's the market. I'm a firm believer in letting the market work.
Okay. You said recently that Telstra is likely to become NBN Co's largest customer as it progressively migrates its voice and broadband traffic to NBN Co's wholesale-only open access network. What percentage of retail customers do you expect Telstra to retain?
We've made no predictions on that basis. Our assumptions on revenue...
They start with the big lead
yes,
on everybody else.
So it's, I guess, common sense would say it's likely to be... they would likely to be, at least initially, our largest customer.
In your business modelling, you haven't made any...
We don't distinguish between... All we look at
it doesn't matter to us if a Telstra customer becomes an iONAT customer, an Optus customer, or back to a Telstra customer. They're still on our network.
And in fact, the network's so configured, we have a number of data...
the beauty of a monopoly minister, yes.
It's so configured that, in fact, you could have different service providers providing different services to the same customer over our network. They could get video from one service provider and internet access from another. And another service, perhaps not dreamt about yet, from a third.
Has the growth in retail customers that Telstra has enjoyed had an impact on the figures in the heads of agreement?
I'm not at liberty really to discuss about the factors that have influenced what we're doing now in converting from heads of agreement to definitive agreement. But both companies are not trying to fine-tune everything in real time. Just these kind of deals you couldn't do them if you kept trying to adjust things.
Okay. Did you, just to be clear in what you said there, Mr. Quigley, because I may have slightly misheard it, did you say it does have an impact on the finalisation of negotiations?
No, I'm saying I'm giving you a philosophical approach by the two companies, which is such that neither company is trying to constantly be adjusting for latest small changes in the market. You'd never end if you did that.
Will the domination of the retail market by a single player, if that occurs, as certainly in the early stages is likely?
Sorry, what occurred?
The domination of the retail market.
I probably have to say to you, if you look at iONAT's success, it's recently just... it's advertised now. It's the third biggest broadband provider in the country, and that's a relatively new thing. The TPG are very competitive. I don't think you should make an assumption about anybody being dominant. I think you'll see a lot of competition, which is going to be great for consumers.
Well, when I asked the question about Mr. Quigley's quote, which was assuming that Telstra will be the largest customer of NBN Co, it was met by both of you with a yes, well, of course it will be.
No, but there's a difference between largest customer and dominant. And you use the word dominant in a quite deliberative, pejorative way. So we just wanted to correct and make sure we completely set aside that largest customer and dominant in the marketplace are two entirely different concepts that you try to tie together.
Will having either a dominant player or a significantly larger player have any impact or put any pressure on the wholesale prices that you've modelled?
No, not at all. It's by the way, I think the market will respond in a dynamic way. Yep. Remember, the what we're providing also with our operational support systems and business support systems is to make it much easier for retail service providers to manage this network that we're providing them, and also for end users to churn, to move between them, or to have, as I said, 2 or 3 service providers providing the different services. So that the industry dynamics will evolve and will change.
Does Telstra get paid as customers switch off or are switched off from their copper network, or will it be when customers connect to the NBN?
The details of that, I think, if I can ask that they'll probably be revealed when the deal, if it is consummated, is made public.
Okay. I might defer to Senator Fisher for a moment or two, if that suits the chair.
Okay, thank you. Let's start with some questions about wireless.
I'd love to. Would you like to read some quotes?
If I can get ready. Okay.
I only gave you the edited highlights before. I have many emails.
I'm going to
Senator.
Ask you about something you said at the previous estimates, but to go back to your opening statement, Mr. Quigley, where you talked about the purchase of spectrum.
Yes.
Your recent announcement. Now that's in the 2.3 to 3.4 gigahertz band, isn't it?
There's 2 bands, 2.3 gigahertz and 3.4 gigahertz.
Okay. Now, that spectrum will be used to support the 12 megabits per second wireless broadband to people between the 93rd and 98th percentile, will it?
93rd and 97th.
And 97 now, yes?
No, it's always been 97, 4 and 3.
Okay.
Comes to 7.
Except when it was 98 in April 2007.
That was fibre to the
node. That's right, it was.
And just while I'm talking, if I could just correct before I get a irate phone call, IONET are actually the number 2 provider of DSL broadband in the country now.
So, Minister, you said at the previous hearings about wireless broadband, let me be really clear about this, you can't monitor somebody 24/7 every second on an existing fixed wireless network or on some of the copper we have in the ground. Broadband is required to guarantee the security of the service, meaning it doesn't go, I hope I can do this justice, meaning it doesn't go blip, whoops, what happened in that 5 minutes when it was turned off?
What's the context of that conversation, a medical application?
So my question, will the wireless service that's delivered over this spectrum be able to support the e-health applications, such as monitoring in the home?
As we've said all along, it isn't possible for the laws of physics to be countermanded by Senator Fisher, Mike Quigley or Steve Conroy. And when we've been arguing about the properties of fibre versus copper and wireless, we've been pointing out there are things you can do on fibre you can't do on other forms of broadband.
So does that mean that those who are receiving part of the purchased spectrum, which will support the 12 megabits for people between the 93rd and 97th percentile, does that mean that those people will have facilities through their wireless service delivered over the spectrum to access e-health applications such as monitoring
what
in the home?
People are going to get both the
no,
satellite, what people are going to get from both the satellite and the fixed wireless network is a massive improvement on what your government left them.
Will they
20
get
times better.
The remote e-health services you promised them, Minister?
As I have repeatedly said, there are some things you just can't do on copper, satellite and fixed wireless or mobile. And they can be done on fibre.
Can you do the e-health services remote in the home over your wireless through
you
the
can't do,
spectrum just purchased? You promised those people,
No,
exactly
I didn't.
those people,
No,
exactly
no,
that.
I did not. Don't mislead the Senate. But let me be clear, you want to build a wireless network across the whole country that won't deliver any of these services. We're going to be delivering 93% of people's homes to enable these applications. But your plan is to leave millions of Australians without access to it. Millions.
Okay, so you promised, didn't you? I think that was a big no to people getting the remote health services.
What is no is that the millions of Australians, millions who will get none of these applications from the Liberals' broadband plan, both your current one, the one you took, the one you took, the one you took to the election, and the 18 plans before that.
Minister, you promised
you're on your 20th plan, and you're still leaving millions of Australians without any access to this.
You promised country dwellers speeds of up to 12 or speeds of 12 megabits per second.
I think you are now actually just making it up as you go. I've been very clear about the difference of capacity of fibre to wireless and satellite. I've never promised anybody outside the 93% they could get all of the same applications. I've not done that. You, however, keep pretending regularly with Mr Turnbull and Mr Abbott that you can defy the laws of physics and that you can deliver all of these applications to millions of Australians on a wireless network. And you're just...
So,
making
Minister,
it up.
Was it correctly reported in your favourite newspaper, The Australian?
Can I start with the precursor?
February,
probably not, but go on.
That you've reassured residents who are going to be wireless served that they will get peak speeds of at least 12 megabits per second.
That's, I think, an accurate statement, Mr Cook.
Okay. So that leaves room, does it not, that other than peak speeds, their actual speeds could be significantly lower because peak is typically used to describe the maximum, and the more the download, the slower the speed.
The key difference between how most commercial mobile broadband
I'm asking
networks...
about your NBN, Minister.
The key difference, you do need to understand this, Senator
Yeah, but
Fisher.
if I tried to ask about that, I'd be told it was a program of a past government and not subject to
the key difference...
estimates.
No, I'm talking...
Senator Fisher, Senator Conroy, this is going to start to deteriorate even further. Senator Fisher, I know you're tired, but you should. But could you just ask a question and allow the Minister to reply?
And I am actually attempting to
without
answer
interruption. And Senator Conroy, I'd ask you to do the same.
I'm actually just trying to answer the question. The key difference between the way a commercial mobile broadband network is configured is that when they talk about peak speeds, they're talking about at the centre standing next to the tower. The way that the NBN's fixed wireless network is being constructed is that you get those peak speeds at the edge of the footprint. So at the edge of, you drew some circles before, at the edge of your circle, which means that the people who live inside that get considerably more speed than those who are on the edge. So there's a key difference between how the network is being configured. As to the dimensioning and all those sorts of things, I mean, I think Mr Quigley's in the process of finalising some tenders where there are still some issues that are being resolved.
Yes, there's flexibility to vary the speeds that you can get within the cell site. I mean, you have the choice in our network. We could dimension it such that 12 megabits per second is delivered right across the entire cell site, or higher speeds at the centre and going out to a minimum of 12. So we are also dimensioning, if I could mention it, Senator, it's not just peak.
A minimum of 12 or a maximum of 12?
No, a minimum of 12 peak speed.
Peak speed?
Yes.
So does that mean that the maximum speed that wireless users will get is 12 megabits per second?
No, it doesn't.
No, that's why they use the word minimum.
But there's another parameter that's very important. There's another parameter that's very important. It's a little complex.
Degree of usage.
What's called is the average busy hour throughput that you can get,
Volume.
which is the volume that you can download. What we're doing in the fixed wireless network is we're dimensioning an order of magnitude above what a commercial mobile service would dimension, so that they will get a much better service from the fixed wireless network. And we can also control how many users are in the cell, where in a mobile network you can't, because people come and go all the time in the cell. You can't figure out. You've got to keep adjusting it because people come and go in it. Whereas what we do is we have a planned and fixed number of people in that cell because it's fixed.
Okay.
So we can give them a much better service.
All right. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Mr Quigley. A couple of more questions around the universal service obligation. Why was the study let directly rather than going to open tender? It went to McKinsey and Co, didn't it?
So
well, whomever can answer that at the table, the Universal Services Obligation Study, McKinsey.
Sorry, my apologies. I was distracted.
Did it go to tender? I understand not.
Sorry, did the McKinsey's go to tender? Yeah,
for
absolutely.
the USO study.
Oh, sorry, for the USO. Sorry.
For the USO, it was a direct source to McKinsey's on the basis of the extreme urgency provision in the Commonwealth Procurement Guidelines.
Right, not on the basis of merit.
Well, the Commonwealth Procurement Guidelines provide for the circumstances in which you can go outside the open tender process, and one of those is extreme urgency. We saw a quote from McKinsey's, and its offer was assessed as providing value for money on the basis of the necessary skills and expertise
Why
that
was
they
there
offered.
extreme urgency?
It was brought about by the fact that we needed to engage in the negotiations with Telstra, and one of the things that they're advising us on is the negotiations with Telstra in relation to the establishment of USO Co.
But wasn't the imminence of that foreseen?
Well, the caretaker...
Maybe
sure.
answer that? No, Senator. 20 June last year. At 19 June we didn't have a deal. 20 June we did have a deal.
But you wanted one. The Minister was
yes, but I don't engage consultants.
Desperately.
I don't engage consultants on the basis of anybody's wants. I engage them on a basis that we have actually a deal in place and we have to have it completed according to the terms of that deal. The expectation was that by the timeframes we've been talking about, the middle of this year, shareholders would have voted on it. So USOCO is a serious element of this. It's
Indeed.
a $2 billion element of it. We need professional advice and we need it urgently. In those circumstances, McKinsey's had both the capacity...
we get what we're seeking, but don't prepare for if we do, and then when we do, we go, oh gosh, it's here.
No, we do not tender on the basis of a possible deal. No one does that.
What estimates has the government... Thank you for answering the question. What estimates has the government now got of the cost of the universal service obligation?
We've done... well, as you probably know, Senator, there's a long history of estimates of the cost of the universal service obligation and a very wide disparity in those estimates. In the hundreds of millions of dollars, the disparity exists. I think previous governments have published estimates. I think the ACCC has some knowledge. I think Telstra claims a substantial body of knowledge, as it obviously would as the provider. And we are currently engaged in attempting to bridge the gap such that, as I advised Senator Ludlam earlier, we can put a proposition in front of the remainder of industry. That's part of the detailed negotiation that's going on at the moment.
Okay. Given the government's commitment to maintain existing fixed line services outside the fibre footprint, how many copper services will be maintained after the fibre rollout?
Well, in an order of magnitude sense, Senator, we have the 7% and the 93%.
Okay. So if NBN doesn't achieve, goodness forbid, the sought 93% coverage, will more copper lines need to be maintained?
I think that's a speculative question I couldn't really answer, Senator.
All right. If the 93% coverage is achieved, how many exchanges and how many kilometres of copper will need to be kept in service?
We are currently negotiating with Telstra on the exchange issue. Kilometres of copper, I couldn't make an estimate. I mean, we could probably revise such a number of... once we're there, if you know what I mean, we could probably... I don't think we could prove it right now.
No.
But the exchanges, we're certainly in discussion with Telstra about which exchanges obviously would have to be maintained for that purpose.
Okay. So the annual cost of maintaining the copper What will that be and who will pay for it? USOCO or Telstra?
No, it's included in the USOCO
All right.
estimates.
Thank you. And what's the... we'll put it this way. If existing subscribers are keeping copper service beyond the fibre footprint and that network won't be upgraded, as I understand it, to offer higher speed broadband, will those users who will be predominantly regional have to pay for two services, one from Telstra, their existing copper voice service, and one from NBN Co, which will be their wireless or satellite service?
Senator Fisher, can I ask that to be a last question, because we've really got to move.
Thanks, Chair.
Tidy up.
They're in the same position as every other consumer across the country. Effectively, they can maintain and pay to maintain their existing phone service, as every consumer across the country can simply do. They don't have to become a broadband customer of NBN, or they can take up a broadband service via wireless or satellite as provided by NBN. So they're in the same position. It's just that what they're guaranteed of is the retention of the copper.
All right, well, thank you. They maybe wish they were in the same position. They're not quite, but
well,
I
let's be
understand
clear.
the context
You want to build
answering that.
You want to build a second-rate wireless
network.
network.
Time is limited. If it's not limited,
second-rate wireless network for millions of Australians. Millions.
That finishes my questions.
Okay, thank you, Senator Ludlam.
Thank you. I'll be quick. Mr. Quigley, I asked you a couple of turns of the wheel ago about getting the service out to remote Aboriginal communities, and particularly interested in WA. What kind of equipment will you need? The places that I'm talking about aren't on your fibre footprint, and they're not on your wireless footprint either, as far as I can tell. What kind of equipment will people need in the communities that are well off the beaten track on the ground? What kind of upgrades?
If they're not in the fibre footprint, not in the wireless footprint.
They're going to be in the satellite
footprint.
What kind of equipment will they need to connect to them?
They'll need the most obvious one is a dish.
And are you going to turn up and provide that?
Yes.
You are?
Yeah.
Everywhere?
Yes.
Every caravan in the country? I mean, there's somewhere there's got to be diminishing returns. So...
Look, I guess, are we defining a caravan as a premise?
It's
I mean, if you're in a caravan park where...
In a caravan park
if it's not a permanent...
If it's permanent, no, we're just trying to make sure we've got the right definition. If you're saying this is their permanent residence...
Yeah.
Yeah, if it's a permanent residence, yes.
In a caravan.
Okay, fantastic. What do we do with the 22% of premises in the country that don't yet have a computer? It's probably not your problem as a network engineer, but that's nearly a quarter of Australian premises that don't yet even have a computer. So we don't even need to talk about the speed of their dial-up connection or whatever.
Look, I mean, we are seeking to provide people with the infrastructure that will allow them to take the opportunity from a 21st century telecommunications network. I'm sure there are programs at the moment, and I think we've got some aged, I'm just trying to think of the name of the program, kiosks, I think we call them, where we're educating the elderly about how to use a computer. This is proving to be enormous. Broadband for seniors, thank you, Mr. Harris. Broadband for seniors, which is proving enormously successful. And people are going out, once they feel the confidence, once they've grasped the opportunity from that education, they are going and purchasing computers to use for themselves. But if your question is, will the government provide a computer to every home, I'd have to say the answer is no.
That wasn't my question, and we don't really have time tonight to go into this properly, but I was a bit shocked to realise that it was that high. So
yeah, no, I'm actually...
premises, that's not the case. Yeah. Homes, residential. It's a very high fraction. I'm
like you, I'm surprised. But
just again, while we're in WA, the Vic Park first release site, can you just tell us how that's Victoria Park in Perth, in metropolitan Perth, how that one is tracking? How are you going with that?
That's in a second release.
Oh, is it really? Oh, yeah, of course it is. Sorry. How is that going?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's still in the planning and design stages. Construction's only taking place in the first release sites, the 5 mainland first release.
I was under the misapprehension that you'd at least started.
We started the consultations about, I think if what we said at the time when we announced the other sites was that we wanted to consult with local communities. We'd arbitrarily drawn lines on maps and there were some anomalies and so I think we learned from that and we wanted to engage the local communities in conversations about where the best place to grow from next.
Right. So we'll have to wrap up, I think.
Can I ask one more?
Sure.
I did tell the Chair I'd only take up 5 minutes. I just want to put a question to you about your discussions between NBN Co and Energy Networks Association, ENA. I gather you're down to monthly meetings now. This is in order to provide data services directly to electricity utilities for smart grid provision and so on?
There's a range of subjects we're discussing with energy utilities, including potential access to their facilities, because in some cases we may want to use access to poles or underground conduits that they may have. So there's two sides to it. There's one as them as a supplier and there's one as us as a provider to them of a service, potentially.
Okay. All I've got on this issue is open source reporting. So is there anything that you're able to tell us about the status of those negotiations, or is there a point at which you'll conclude negotiations?
With whom? Sorry, with?
Pardon?
With the energy.
Yeah, with ENA in particular.
I think we're having discussions with ENA as a representative body, but the actual discussions, detailed discussions, and any commercial arrangements would be with the particular energy utility itself. And as you probably know, we do have a deal, in fact, with 3 energy utilities around the country: ETSA, Ergon, and Aurora.
All right, I think I will leave it there, but I might pursue this a bit further in subsequent sessions.
Thanks,
Chair.
Senator Conroy, you may want to take some of this on notice given the time, so I've got to come back to Senator Birmingham. But are you aware of the white paper, I think it's by Huawei?
Huawei. You'll get used to saying it.
Huawei, right. It's called Connecting Communities, a white paper by Dr. Tim Williams.
Yes.
You're aware of that?
Yeah.
Are you aware that on page 3 of the executive summary, after it outlines a range of benefits on citizenship and broadband, it outlines the UK political consensus in relation to broadband, that the new government, and it quotes David Cameron, not in my clan, let me tell you, never heard them in Scotland, that we need to make sure that people aren't left behind as more and more services move online. It then goes on to say there's a political consensus, and that is the new government wants to complete the UK superfast broadband network faster than planned by the previous government. Then goes on to say that they want to reach the final third quickly, and they talk about digitally including people and make sure people are not excluded. I know it's a long question, that's why you might want to have a think about this, but it's such an important issue that we'll get political consensus in the UK and none here.
Yeah. Now, look, I am very familiar with it. I've met with the author. I missed his press club speech. Unfortunately, I was interstate. He launched it at the press club. I think it's a very impressive report. It highlights a range of examples of where broadband networks have been upgraded and people have taken advantage with new applications in health and education, in aged care. There's some very impressive results. Just one quote that stuck in my mind that I've got in front of me, particularly because it talked about wanting to reverse the trend of people moving into big cities and depopulating regional and rural areas of the UK. And what they found is that in the UK, rural areas stopped losing people and are now attracting the successful back, with high-speed broadband a key force in the comeback. And I think that's one of the reasons why you can't afford to build a second-rate broadband network in regions and a world-class broadband network in the cities. Because if you actually want to deal with the problems that Sydney has, the problems that Melbourne are potentially forecast to have, you've got to actually provide equality of service and equality of pricing. Those are the two most fundamental principles that underpin the NBN. So that's why the arguments around sticking a second-rate broadband service through a dodgy wireless service that the opposition were going to put in place is such a sellout, and for the National Party in particular, it is such a sellout that locks millions of regional rural Australians into a digital divide which will only get wider faster than it currently does. This study is a fabulous study. I'd encourage every senator, every member of parliament to read it. It really does set out very eloquently the case for why you should have a national broadband network.
Thanks, Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Chair. Telstra are clearly going to, assuming you reach the point where Telstra put a deal to their shareholders, are going to produce public material to explain to their shareholders why it's a good deal for them and why it's in their interests. I assume the government and NBN Co have undertaken some analysis as to why the deal that you're negotiating is value for money for the taxpayer?
Yeah, we wouldn't be doing the deal if we didn't think it was a good deal for NBN Co and the government, obviously.
What analysis has been undertaken?
Very, very extensive analysis.
Internal or engaging?
Internal, but in cooperation, of course, with our investment bankers, Goldman Sachs.
Okay. So analysis by yourselves internally and by Goldman Sachs in terms of advice and reports and otherwise?
Working closely together. We had to build a base case, which is like a no-deal case, in order to compare a deal case. And we were constantly looking at the NPV differences in there. So we built some very sophisticated models.
Just as Telstra shareholders will be provided with their value for money case, will Australian taxpayers be provided with their value for money case?
Sorry, Senator Birmingham, I was distracted by Mr Harris, who was being frivolous. What was the...
Just as Telstra shareholders will be provided with their value for money case as to why they should accept the deal, will Australian taxpayers be provided with an explanation as to why it's a good deal?
I think we've released a fair bit of the business plan, which argues very strongly that it's beneficial to the NBN. We've commissioned Caliburn, which has looked at the business case, and I again repeat, hopefully to make Mr Quigley blush, that the findings from Caliburn were that this was the quality of the business case that was released was the equivalent of one of the top 50 ASX listed companies, which I think is an extraordinary statement for a start-up company.
These ministers, given the time frame, these are analyses that have said why a deal is better. These are analyses that have said why a deal is better than no deal, but of course have not analysed the cost of the deal and the detail of the deal.
Given you're building the national broadband network, the deal is all about how do you build that more cost effectively with the deal than without one. And we wouldn't be entering into the deal unless that was significantly positive for
I assure you that the board would not have allowed or recommended to the government to do the deal if they felt it wasn't value positive for the NBN Co and the government.
Will any of the Goldman Sachs assessment or otherwise be publicly available for people to see that taxpayers have got a good value for money deal?
Well, the Goldman Sachs has worked for NBN Co.
Yes. So they advise our board, of course.
Yes. Not asked to release.
Well, that's, I wasn't necessarily directing the question at either of you. I'm happy for Mr Quigley to answer the same question, Minister.
We need to present a case, obviously, as we do. The board, when it looks at the deal, it signs it off, presents its analysis to our shareholder. We have two shareholder ministers, so we present that to the government. That's the responsibility we have.
Have you prepared any... So you're not saying that it will be released to, or that a case or argument will be released to the Australian people?
Well, the business case has made... and I think when we released the business case and when we more importantly, when we announced the Telstra deal, we announced that it will be cheaper for taxpayers and faster ultimately. So I think that's I'm confused by your question because it's self-evident in all the figures that have been produced by NBN Co that it's value positive for...
Perhaps ultimately, of course, it goes back to the problem of not having a cost-benefit analysis to start with. But
I thought we could escape the evening without that drivel. Without that drivel.
Let's not... Well, really, there we go, Minister.
I thought you might have covered yourself in glory, but no. You fell at the last hurdle.
Has the NBN Co prepared any contingency plans or put any contingency plans in place in the event that Telstra ultimately rejects the deal?
Yes, of course. In developing in evaluating the deal, we had to have a base case, which, in other words, if you don't do the deal, how do you build the network? So we have that. That's obviously sitting.
And McKinsey's looked at that call-out plan. Given
the legislative timeline and the bills to pass through the Parliament, and of course the timing of negotiations with Telstra and the need for Telstra to go to a vote, how confident are you that the deal can be done in the timelines that you're currently working towards?
We're working towards that. So that's what the teams are, as we speak now, still working.
Going to actually be able to meet the timelines that
all I can say at this point in time in these complex negotiations, and this is still complex, turning the financial heads of agreements into definitive agreements, both teams are working very hard, very positively, with the best will in the world. And our chairman of NBN Co and myself obviously meet with the senior people in Telstra.
You see no slippage from your side of the equation at present?
What I would say is we are proceeding as fast as we can with the due care and diligence you would expect when we're talking about the use of public money, and this is obviously a big transaction.
Certainly, but there have been some public timelines talked about, such as having a deal by June.
We've never talked about public timelines. We've never talked about timelines. NBN Co has never said we will do anything by any specific date.
I assure you that's the case.
Yeah.
So you don't
I'm sorry, I was just coughing there.
So you don't have a timeline for when the deal
we will work as fast as we can work with appropriate due diligence. So I've never committed. I put always
10 seconds, Mike.
looking after the public interest and public funds ahead of necessarily going at a specific speed.
Well, it's a nice note to finish on.
Thank you, Senator Birmingham. That concludes. Bit of order, Senator Conroy. That concludes today's hearing. Senators are reminded that written questions on notice should be provided to the Secretariat by close of business on Monday, the 28th of February. The committee has set Friday, the 8th of April 2011 as the date by which agencies must return answers to questions on notice. I thank the Minister and officers for their attendance. My fellow senators and Hansard, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all.
Thank you.